Hi everyone. Hope you're having a nice morning. Welcome to the openQA live stream tutorial type of session. So this is going to be me mostly rambling about openQA and trying to provide you with some kind of introduction tutorial type thing so that you can sort of get a feeling how this thing works, what it is. So just as a disclaimer, um, and I totally butchered this introduction already. So let's say first thing, hi, I'm Dan. I'm a software developer at SUSE whose main task is actually not working on openQA, but I sort of learned this on the side to test some of the packages that I use. And since I'm not really an expert, I hope to give you a beginner's perspective. So in case you're already using openQA, this is probably not for you. You're unlikely to learn a lot. I'm going to be watching the Twitch chat, and also in case you want to join the voice chat on Discord, you can take a look. So there should be you can just join the openSUSE Discord, and one of the guys there was kind enough and created a dedicated channel, so you can just join in there and talk with us. So the ah so the I hope that the voice chat shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to hear it on in the live stream, just for privacy reasons, since this stuff is recorded, and I guess you guys don't want to have your voices recorded on Twitch. So okay, so with that, I see someone posted a link to the voice chat already. Okay, so with that, thanks for the link. Let's get started. So we'll essentially wait a second. Someone is saying, yeah, so you can't hear me on the you can't hear me in the Discord chat, since I muted myself there, as otherwise it's going to be a constant. I'll hear myself twice and 3 times all over the place. So not sure if that's going to be that great, since I think there's a slight delay in the stream. Yeah. So okay, Oliver is writing. There should be a voice chat at the bottom. Although it might be, if you just joined the Discord, that you'll be paused something for a second or for a few minutes before you can join. Okay, so now for the actual openQA part. I more or less assume that you have essentially just heard about openQA, and that's it. So let's first take a look. What is openQA? I've actually got it open here already on my screen. So this is openQA. This is openqa.opensuse.org. And what is this thing actually? So openQA is an operating system testing framework. And it's essentially it simulates user input that you can you can use it to test operating system images. You can actually use it to test essentially anything, but it's mostly used to test operating system images. For instance, openSUSE Tumbleweed. So I said it's used to simulate user input. So I would call myself openQA as the thing that tests the untestable. So imagine if you are familiar with the openSUSE distribution, then you know that we have Leap and we have Tumbleweed. And Leap is kind of the stable one. It's based on, it's closely related to SLE, nowadays even more than it used to be. And that it's relatively slowish, so you can actually test a lot of stuff manually. And it's also done like that. But with Tumbleweed, there's a new snapshot every few days, sometimes even every day. And you just can't test something, for instance, you cannot test the installer of Tumbleweed every single day manually. QA wouldn't be able to keep up with that. And that's what openQA is for. So openQA will essentially do all the installation steps that that a user would do to install Tumbleweed, and then it will check out if you can do if all the applications for which there are tests, if they still work the way you expect them. So let's take a look at this looks in practice. So I've got myself here openqa.opensuse.org. You can open it also yourself if you want, and take a look at all. So if you click on the if you go on the main page, you'll see all the test suites that exist there. And let's just take a look at the last test, which at the snapshot from, that should be yesterday. Yeah, that's from yesterday. So here we'll see all the various actual tests, test suites that get executed, and as you can see on openSUSE, there's really a lot of them. And to show you something what this does, so I talked about the installer. So let's find one. So for instance, this one does an installation step. And here, what you can see here, these are individual tests, and you can take a look which of these steps openQA walks through. So here you can see the it booted up an ISO, and it starts does some selection stuff, etc. And then it starts the installation, and there's a whole bunch of stuff until the installation is finished, and so on and so on. So this is just your high-level overview. If you're super confused right now, that's totally normal, since openQA is a relatively complex beast. And I personally find it also rather overwhelming. At least in the beginning, it can definitely be, but it's extremely practical, I would say, if you have something that can be effectively tested by openQA. So I would say let's take first a step back now that we have just taken a very, very brief look at openQA, and let's talk a bit about when should we actually use openQA? So openQA is really so I said it's used to test the openSUSE distribution. So it really makes sense if you, for instance, if you create a new spin of openSUSE Leap. So let's say you have created a XFCE or a Sway or an i3 spin or something like that with a new window manager. And you want to test that your installer is actually doing the right job and that your window manager works and all that. Since doing that in an automated fashion is, I'm not entirely sure if there is something that you could use for that besides openQA, at least not in the openSUSE infrastructure. So it makes sense for stuff like that. It definitely makes sense for bigger graphical user interface applications. So think, for instance, your Firefox. You want to ensure that every new tumbleweed snapshot that Firefox actually starts, which is definitely a nice thing to have. Imagine your GIMP, and you can, in theory, essentially test anything. So I've said it's mostly about operating system images, but you can also test specific applications. So for instance, the Open Build service itself is tested also partially in openQA. openQA is tested in openQA because why not? It's like with bootstrapping, like with compilers. Only a programming language can only call itself a real programming language if the compiler is written in the language itself, or at least some people see it that way. And openQA does the same thing with testing. openQA tests itself. But for instance, where it doesn't really make sense to use openQA, is to use it to test your console applications. So, for instance, if you got yourself, let's say you want to test the JSON processor JQ, doing that in openQA, it doesn't really make sense to do that, since running tests for something like that can be done during RPM build. But it can be done, so that's it's certainly doable. But as I said, I would say you need it makes more sense for a graphical user interface application. For instance, for Emacs. So I would say we can later when I've more or less finished with trying to explain what exactly openQA is, we'll try to write some tests for Emacs. And why Emacs? Because I use it. But we can also, if anyone has any other suggestions what we should tackle, feel free to write it in the chat or scream at me on Discord. I'm all open to suggestions. Very well, so I hope everyone has now a rough idea what openQA can do. Now, I've said openQA is, you can see openQA here on openqa.opensuse.org. And now, if you want to test stuff, you actually need to run the tests somewhere. And how openQA works, you have the openQA itself, which consists of a web user interface, a scheduler, a database backend, and whatnot, all the moving bits and pieces. And then the tests are actually run on workers. And if you want to now work on your own tests, you have to run them somewhere. And there's essentially two options. You can run your tests on the openSUSE instance if you have an account and sufficient privileges. So for that you'd need I'm actually not entirely sure if you have them by default to run jobs there, but in case you are in case you need the privileges, you can ask on IRC for an openSUSE factory on Freenode, and people can help you there. I'm not going to mention names, not to throw anyone under the bus, but people should be able to give you privileges. So in case you are on openQA.opensuse.org, you can just go here to log in, and it will forward you to the login thingy, which should use the same credentials as you use for Bugzilla or for progress.opensuse.org. So for the it's essentially the new authentication system. So you can use openQA.opensuse.org to run tests, but I'll say O3 for instead of openQA.opensuse.org, since that it just takes too long to say that out loud, and my voice is probably going to stop working in half an hour anyway, so let's make the most out of it. It also makes sense to run a local instance if you are going to do more stuff, since O3 doesn't have a whole lot of workers, and if you then schedule tests to be run, it might take hours for them to actually run, and that can be very inconvenient, because then you start your test and you just wait for hours until it even launches, and you find out you have forgotten a semicolon, and the test just fails, and then you do the same thing over and over again. And so it really makes sense to have a local instance, provided you have a relatively strong machine. So if you only have a tiny laptop with a Pentium dual core processor, might not work too well, but if you've got a few cores to spare, I'd definitely recommend to set up a local instance. In a perfect world, I'd walk you through how to do that, but unfortunately, it takes quite a bit of time. And by quite a bit of time, I don't mean that you have to type a lot. You just launch a script, and then we'd be watching it for 45 minutes to finish, which that's quite boring. So I'll be probably switching to this window a lot. This is my openQA cheat sheet, and essentially what you want is I see there's a question in the chat whether this can be done in Docker or Podman container. So I know that the Fedora infrastructure, they have a setup for Docker. I don't think that they have ported it to Podman yet. But if you don't need it to be Podman, you can use the openQA Bootstrap container script. This is what I'm actually running on my local machine. So what you should see hopefully right now is my console window, and this is my local openQA instance. And this is not running in Docker or Podman, but this is a systemd nspawn container. And this is actually the local instance. It looks exactly the same way O3 looks, but if you'll see down here, it's running on localhost. So in case you want to set it up yourself, just install the openQA Bootstrap package, run openQA Bootstrap container, and then grab a coffee and go for lunch. It's going to take a while. And after once you're done with that, you can it will also tell you to invoke this command, and this will give you a bash shell. So if you'll see here, this allows me to get into this container. I'm just going to go quickly back into the directory, and that gives you a fully working openQA instance that you can use to run your local tests. Good. I see someone is asking if there's a link. So to the document, you mean the cheat sheet that I have opened here? And yeah, so to the cheat sheet, unfortunately not yet. I want to. I have it on my to-do list to convert this into a nice tutorial, but this information is already you can find it in the official openQA documentation. So if you go to open.qa, you'll get to the openQA website, and I definitely recommend to take a look at this as well. If you go to documentation, single HTML file, this page has everything, and I mean literally everything. It contains even more than I know about openQA. So you'll quickly find out that I don't know about most of the stuff. I have no clue. I can show you around for some basic tests, but openQA can do so much stuff. It's really amazing. But yeah. So if you want to set it up, so the documentation, the setup should be here. Quick bootstrapping. So if you're running openSUSE, you can, it essentially says this stuff here. So this is the same thing, and this will give you a locally running instance that you can use to have your to run your tests locally. Don't run it in production, since the default instance that you have that you'll get set up locally is not using any decent login. So this is my local instance running on localhost, and if I press on login, I'll immediately be logged in as the demo user, and I have admin privileges. So don't make it reachable on the internet. You're going to have a bad time otherwise. Probably not very soon, but at some point. So use that just for locally playing around with that. And definitely take a look at the openQA documentation, especially if you want to run an instance that's reachable on the internet for some reason, and O3 is not sufficient for you. Good. So then I hope we have the local stuff. We got that covered. So now let's start taking a look at openQA itself. First, fair warning, and I hope that now the chat won't empty itself completely. openQA is written in Perl, and the tests are also written in Perl. People still there? Okay, good. It's not that bad. Yeah, so I know Perl has unfortunately a reputation of being of not being a very friendly language, and it has its quirks, but you just have to you just don't do any crazy regular expression stuff, and you'll be fine. And I'd say at least the openSUSE tests are written in a very sane way. So see, someone writes in the chat that they don't know anything about openQA. Yeah, here's a secret. Me neither. I really am not a Perl expert. So most of the stuff I know about Perl is from writing openQA tests and copy pasting stuff from the internet. So it's Perl is kind of it's a if you've done some bash scripting, it's a bit like it's in places a bit like bash, and has some of the weird quirks that bash has, that you have functions and don't have to specify parameters exactly, but it's definitely good enough for openQA. So, but if you're going to write tests, you unfortunately need to take a look at that, and you need to use Perl for that. Good. So, yeah. So as someone is writing in the chat, it's very strong with regular expressions. Yes, definitely. So Perl is really awesome if you want to do a lot of stuff with regular expressions. I personally don't like them a lot, since regular expressions tend to be hard to understand, at least for me. And since every programming language has a slightly different regular expression syntax, means if you're used to, for instance, the Python one or Rust or whichever else, then you take a look at another language and suddenly it all looks like mumbo jumbo. But yeah. So now back to topic, since otherwise I'll trail off and this will no longer be about openQA. Let's now take a look at how we're actually going to write some tests. So I'd say we'll go easy first, and I know someone in the chat says that he wants to test XFCE stuff. We'll maybe start out easier, since I'm not exactly sure what you want to do with XFCE, since there are actually XFCE tests. So we have a create hard disk XFCE. And we have here one that runs additional tests on XFCE. And in case you're interested about this particular test, these ones were, as far as I know, written by Oliver Kurz, who is also in the chat. So should be he should be there as O Kurz. So in case you want to sync up, that should be okay. So want to learn dist upgrades between leap releases. Ooh, okay. I must say I don't think I can show that right now. how to do that exactly. We have dist upgrade tests, but I would say let's yeah, I can hear you in the Discord chat. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just I just say let's try to write a single test and see how far we even get with that. Yeah. Good. So, and as I've been already talking, so there's openQA has this concept. So you have tests, you have test suites, you have job groups, and you have so much more. So for instance, if you go to O3 and just open this menu, you'll see as an operator. Or let's go to my local instance, which has more or less exactly the same info since I copied them over. So you have medium types, you have machines defined here, you have test suites, you have job groups, you have scheduled products. Did I show? Yeah, job groups, assets, workers. So if I'd go through all this, we'd be here still today in the afternoon. So I'd say let's try to not dive too deeply into that. So in case you let's go first to test suites. So as you see, so a test suite is more or less it's a collection of individual tests that's of individual tests and individual steps that will be run. And as you can see here, for instance, here's a rate test. The XFCE ones. This is also a test suite. The create HDD XFCE one. One of the tests that I've created is these are tests for the RStudio IDE, and so you can see these test suites. They have a name. There's a bunch of settings. I'll go into these later on, and then they have a description. So the most important part is of a test suite are these settings. But we'll start out with something. I'd say we'll go for something easier, and we won't create a new one. We'll just reuse and modify existing tests. So if you for instance now take a look at these test suites, then you can find them. You can find exactly the same thing on O3. So for instance, the RStudio one, you'll see it's here. And if I now click here on this green thing, it will open me this view, which shows all the executed steps. And now you might wonder, so what are these things here exactly? So this is each of these lines. So this one, this and this. These are individual tests, and each of these corresponds to a single file that you can find out and you can get the file contents by just clicking here. So this is a single test, and this one will and it corresponds to a single Perl file that is executed. Now, how does openQA know which of these files to choose? So this part is actually, unfortunately, a little bit complicated, since there's essentially two ways how to tell openQA that. And there's the old way. So there's the old way how to do that, and for that we have to go a little bit into history, and it was essentially, as far as I know it, openQA was written something like I think 10-15 years ago started out by Bernhard Wiedemann. And back then it was more or less just a make file, and that later on evolved into having a main.pm, so a main Perl module that would run all these scheduling. But what is done nowadays is that all this is scheduled via YAML files, which makes it, in my opinion, a lot more understandable. Okay, so now now we know we have our tests. So we have our test suite. Our test suite consists of individual tests, and these individual tests correspond to files. We can take a look at these. And now we want to modify them. So where are these actually? And for that, if you want to find them, they are on for openSUSE. They are in the OS autoinst in this repository in OS under the OS autoinst organization, OS autoinst dist3 openSUSE. This one, this contains all the tests, and if you have set up your local openQA instance, so I'm now in the local instance in the container, and it will automatically set it up so that under varlib openQA tests openSUSE, you'll have this repository checked out. So you can just do git status, and as you see, I'm already on a separate branch here. So, but this is just the OS autoinst repository. So here you can find all these all the sources for all of these individual tests. Good. Now that we have that part covered, so if you now want to start modifying stuff, there's a few workflows that you can do. You can of course just say, okay, I'm going to start modifying stuff here, and modify them here, run the tests, etc. Or you can also do what I usually tend to do, is that I have a have these things forked. So I have a fork of the OS Autoinst repository, and I push the changes there, and so have my local branch checked out. But let's now say I hope I've roughly explained how what tests are, but what I've so far haven't covered at all is how does roughly openQA actually run tests, and how does it do stuff? Since I've only showed you here fancy pictures of that show screenshots, and you can do sliders. Cool. And if you've never seen this, well, that's all nice and pretty, but what on earth does this mean? What it says something like needle and stuff. So what is this? So initially, something like half an hour ago or so, I told you that openQA is it tests the untestable, and it simulates user input. And for that, openQA was designed, and this is a pretty nifty idea. So what openQA does is you give it an ISO, or you give it a virtual disk image or something like that, and openQA launches this virtual machine and connects via VNC to it. And that means, so it gets essentially a live video feed from your virtual machine. It takes screenshots of that, and then it checks the video output using the image recognition library openCV, and matches it against expected stuff. So, and these expectations are so-called needles in openQA. So that's what you see in these images. So what openQA can of course also do is it can send keys into a virtual machine, into the machine. It can press keys. It can click. It can double click, it can triple click, and it can listen to sounds, it can record sounds, take screenshots, etc., etc. But the main concept is that it checks the screen that it matches a certain needle, and I guess it's called a needle because, well, you search for the needle in the haystack, and that's what you and each step. So each of these screenshots that you see is a match against one of these needles. So let's now start with this RStudio example. So since I wrote this test, I know that the first thing that it does is this one will launch a more or less installed openSUSE tumbleweed with the GNOME desktop, and it will try to launch a terminal. So what it does, it presses Alt F2, and this will, in GNOME, this will open the run command prompt. So I think it does as in KDE, but that looks slightly differently. And the way this is set up is that openQA sends Alt F2 to the virtual machine, and then it checks and then it waits until it gets a needle match. So we can take a look. So if you go to the openQA web UI, you can actually take a look how the screenshot that it took looked. So this is how it looks, and then openQA will show you all the possible needles that it could try matching against. And in this case, there was 100% match for the needle with this name. And what you can now do in the web user interface, so you see this outlined region here, that's the area that openQA will take from the screenshot and that it will try to find. And this is just so that you can define that you can say, hey, I have my desktop runner, and I just want to check that this window will pop up and that there's the text run command. Since now imagine that suddenly this background here that you can see, it changes since the designers have chosen a different background, and you would match against the whole page. That would be completely useless, since every time the background changes or the time here, you would suddenly have a mismatch, and that wouldn't be too useful. So you can have, of course, more regions in your needle, and we'll give this a try in a second, how to use that and how to do anything about that. So you can have multiple regions, and you can also tell openQA to click into certain regions. So if I recall correctly, for instance, I think this needle has also a click. So this is from the RStudio specific test, and as you can see, this one is set up that it just checks, okay, does this about RStudio window open? And so it just checks that there's this heading, that there's the text description, and then it tries to find this OK button, and it will actually click it later on. Okay, good. So is the general concept how this roughly works? Is this a little bit clear, or are there any questions concerning this? So I'm sure there's certain parts that could be explained better. So if you've got any parts that you don't understand, now would be the time to say so. Okay, so someone's calling us asking why the needles are called needles. I think this is just a programmer thing. So if you have I know it from usually from functions that find that you give something which it should search, and a pattern that it should search for. It's frequently called, these parameters are frequently called needle and haystack. so that you search for the needle in the haystack. So yeah, so it's that's just where it comes from. It's essentially just a name. So you could also call it screen match, but it was just called needle. It's just the way it is. Yeah. So let's just let's now. I'd say we'll try a little bit learning by doing, and start and just start with modify. So I'd say we'll start out easy and not create something new, but we'll start and modify an existing test. So I would say, since I already cleverly closed that, but I'd say we'll take we could take, for instance, the RStudio one, since I'm roughly familiar with that, and we could try extending that. So yeah, let's start with that, since I think it will be that will be the easiest to do if we just take an existing test. So writing something from scratch would be definitely cool, but it might be a little overwhelming, or it might be a bit more overwhelming than it is. So let's say we'll modify this test, and maybe we'll just do some stupid, not really useful modifications, but just so that we get the initial concept. So first thing, if we want to, of course, modify this test, is, well, we need to find out what it actually does. So what one way is to just open the file and take a look at the Perl code. So you see there's some use directives at the top. These are I usually copy paste those from other files. But this is something like for instance, an import statement from that you'd have in Python. Then you see sub run. Sub stands for subroutine. This is and run is the name of the so that's the main function that executes the actual test. You can have more subroutines that get called, but so you can define many more subroutines, but the run one, that's the one that contains the actual tests. Now you see there's a call to a function that calls ensure installed. So, and as you might guess, this tells openQA, okay, install these two packages. And in this case, there's also a pretty long timeout, since occasionally it takes ages to finish. Okay, X11 start program. This just means it starts a program under Xorg, and then it runs the following script. So in the RStudio test case, this is just done so that some of the later tests will work. Wait still screen tells openQA that it should wait 1 second until nothing on the screen moves anymore. So this is since your tests are running in virtual machines and some of the workers are not too fast, there can be a noticeable delay between you and between your test sending commands to the worker and everything coming back again, and so there could be some time race conditions there. So you don't wanna. So this is just to ensure that that everything has already settled, and then I just send Alt F4 so that this thing is closed. So, and how this now looks like. I already showed you this previously. So you now might be wondering, but you never press Alt F2. So all this initial part is so all of this is part of the ensure installed. And what ensure installed actually does is it starts xterm. It makes changes to the root user. It makes sure that that package-kit is running, and it installs the packages. So that's so all this business here is the ensure installed call that finishes here. And then you can see, and this is now where x11 start program starts. So it starts the runner. Then you can see here is this is your X terminal. And then in the following you'll see that this assert script run. This one is entered. The second one is entered. And then Alt F4 is pressed, and well, everything's gone. So if we compare that, so these are the scripts that I entered, and then after Alt F4, and then Alt F4 is run, and you see again your desktop. Another important part that can be added to to your test, that's the so-called test flags. So this is also just a function, and if you're and here you can essentially define flags that tell openQA if this how this test should behave. So if we go to the openQA documentation, and I think is it? Yeah. So the openQA documentation actually tells you this, what the test flags are. So you got mostly the options: is this fatal? And so usually you would set you can say, okay, if this test fails, then just abort the whole test suite. And as you've seen, oh, this one is actually not fatal, but it's a milestone. I think it should be fatal. So setting a test as fatal makes sense if the following tests depend on it. So if you say, if you have for instance, like in this case, that's why I assumed it was set to fatal. If you have a test that essentially just prepares stuff, so that it installs some packages, then you have to then it makes sense to set it to fatal, because all the following tests wouldn't really work if your preparation is broken. And then the other interesting thing is mostly milestone. This tells openQA that if you want it, it will create snapshots of this one. And then there's this important part, 1 semicolon. Don't forget it. If you forget it, your test won't run. Don't ask me why it's in there. I don't understand enough of the openQA internals, but this is required. If you forget about it, your test won't work. So I'd say we'll just do something easy, and we'll take this. We'll just play a bit with the RStudio prepare test, so that you see that we actually get to code a little bit on that one. So I would say, how would you go about this one? So if you can, of course, just go to your local openQA instance, if you have a local one, and find this test. So and find the corresponding test file. This is actually in this case easy, since up here we can find the file name. So you see var and it's under var lib openqa share test yada yada yada. So I'm already in the test in the openSUSE directory. So under tests x11 RStudio, and there it is. Yeah. So we could now, of course, just start modifying it in here directly. That's certainly an option. I honestly prefer not to do it this way, since at least my local openQA instance tends to break from time to time, and then I just rm-rf the container, and everything is gone. So what I do is I push my tests into my fork of OS autoins distri openSUSE, and as you see, I just then add a remote that's called dsermac, since that's my username on GitHub, and then I just switch to a branch there. So if you would follow that, you just go to OS autoinst, fork the repository, check it out locally, and then add it locally as a remote. So I've got that part already set up here. So here I'm on my, so this is on my local machine. This is the OS autoins distri openSUSE repo, and if we go to so first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to the master branch, and I'm going to pull in the latest changes from the upstream repository from OS autoinst. Okay. So, and now we're just going to so if we are now just going to find this test file. So it's under tests x11 RStudio prepare. Same file. Cool. So what could we do now? Let's start with since this is about RStudio, so let's say we're going to launch RStudio and do something with that. So just for an example, I'm just going to launch RStudio here, and I actually got some stuff open here. I'm just going to quickly close that, and yeah. So how would we do that? So you see we've got this x11 start program stuff here, and what we're going to do, x11 start program RStudio. Don't forget the semicolon, otherwise nothing will happen. And this would launch. So what this function will do? It will launch your desktop runner. So it will, on GNOME and on KDE, it will press Alt F2, and it will launch, and it will then enter RStudio. And the very important next step is it will then search for a needle to verify that your program is actually started, and it will try to find something that looks like RStudio. So this means we'll have to also supply openQA with such a needle. And fortunately, we can do that via the web UI. Since I haven't really I've only talked a bit about what needles are on a high-level concept, but what they actually are, I have conveniently omitted so far. So let's just let me first check if this is actually the right way. Yes. So this is from another test, but this should in theory work. So what I am just going to do is I'm just going to quickly make a very descriptive test commit, and I'm going to push that into my own branch. Yeah, it's up there. Going to clone that down locally, and yeah, we can call we'll make modifications. We can call the next commit garbage commit if you want. Is it that? No. Yep. So we are there. Now we need to actually run something. And that's where it gets interesting. So let's just kill this thing. Now we want to run an actual test. And this is this part is a little bit complicated due to the way openQA itself works. So if you go to the documentation, I think it initially starts out let me just quickly find it. Is it? Yeah. So unfortunately, the documentation starts out with telling you to use openQA CLI, and this is kind of this is used to kick off a full installation test suite. So what at least I usually use is openQA clone job. Since what we actually want to do now is we want to take this thing and we want to run it on our local instance with our local modifications. And therefore we have this utility openQA clone job. And what you essentially do with openQA clone job is you give it a URL to a openQA instance, you give it a test number, and it will take this test and rerun it on your instance. And you can specify on which instance via this host parameter. So excuse me. If you so in our case, what we want to now do is we'll take the URL of this, and this contains the test number here. And what we'll do is we'll openQA clone job from openqa.opensuse.org. Now we're going to enter the test number, so of this test, which I copied from this one. We'll say that we want it to localhost, so localhost. And what we'll do now is we'll also specify the parameter skip chained dependencies. You don't have to specify this one, but a little bit of explanation what this does is. So what happens here is, as I said, this test boots the tumbleweed GNOME image, and the thing is, this tumbleweed GNOME image is actually produced by another openQA test, and you can find that by if you go to the dependencies tab, you'll see the highlighted one is this RStudio Extra test, and it depends on create HDD GNOME X11 that you can open, and so this one that's one of the very initial tests, and what this one just does is just walks through the installation procedure, and in the end it spits out an image, a QCOV2 image that then later tests use. So you can see RStudio is not the only one. There's also some desktop apps, some specific tests for these, and so on. So, and coming back to this skip chained steps. So if you don't, if you omit this parameter, you would tell openQA, take this test and run everything that depends on it. You can do that, but it just means that your test is going to run a lot longer. We don't really want that, so we'll just say skip those. And what you can also do is, after the test number, you can give it some specific variables, additional ones. This is shown here on the man page as, for instance, make test snapshots. I'm not going to dive too deeply into variables, since you can influence so much stuff with variables. If you're interested in those are also you can find these also in the documentation. But just to give you a brief look of these, if you go into the settings tab on O3 or on your local instance, you'll find all the set variables, and you can essentially clone your job and change all these to do something else. So you could in theory you could reschedule this test to, for instance, not run on Tumbleweed by using a different version. you could tell it to use a different hard drive to boot from. But we'll not go into too much detail for this just yet. But what I will do is, let me just find the name of the variable. Exactly. So I'll also give it skip post fail hooks. And I'm just going to, let's just kick this off since it's going to take a while. So what skip post fail hooks does, it tells so openQA has so-called it supports, each of your tests can have hooks that are run, I think also before, but they are mostly run after the test finishes and if the test fails. And these post-fail hooks, these are, so there's some standard ones that are set up, and most of these collect a lot of information about your system under test. So about your virtual machine in which you run those tests. And the thing is, so you have to understand most of the tests that you, for instance, see on O3, they are just run and no one is actively watching them while that happens. You only essentially every new tumbleweed snapshot that is tested, Dimstar and others, they just take a look what failed, and if there's a unexpected failure, they take a look what could it be, but since that's already now a thing in the past, you can't take a look at the virtual machine, and so these post-fail hooks, they collect a lot of information and they take ages to complete. And since we're currently fiddling with this test, it's probably going to break. But since we'll be actively taking a look at it, we don't need all this information collection. It's just going to slow us down. So during test development, just pass this in there. It's going to make stuff a lot quicker. So cool. So as you see, this already launched, and it started downloading stuff. So these are assets that are required for this test to launch. How openQA exactly figures this out is a little bit more involved. The important thing is, so if you run this yourself, it will probably take a while to download all this, but I was a bit prepared and I already pre-downloaded it. Otherwise we'd spend the next half an hour waiting. And it's already kicked off a new test. So let's go to my local instance, reload it, go here, click on the test, and now you'll see we'll land in the live view. And what you see is it's currently installing. So we can also change here on the details tab, and unfortunately, the web UI is a little bit broken on my local instance for some reason. So in theory, there should be a boot to desktop here, but it shows an experimentation test run with Emacs that I was running previously. So it should show. It should show this boot to desktop thing here, but it's for some reason doesn't. But the RStudio prepare one is still correct. Yeah, and my machine is currently rather suffering since it's now live streaming. It's running openQA, so unfortunately it's not too fast currently. Cool. So we are back in this live view. So this is actually a VNC live connection. And what I'm quickly going to do is I'm going to press go to developer mode, and if you are running on your local instance, ensure that you are logged in. Otherwise, you won't get this developer mode. I'm going to say confirm to control this test. And what this allows me, or what this will allow me in a second, is that I can tell it that if there is a needle mismatch, that it will not fail. It will just pause, which is really really convenient, as you can then start modifying things. So you see we are currently at entering those git commands. Yeah. So this is this stuff where we are currently at. Boom, and now it's entering RStudio. Bummer. Command not found. You see? So, first thing that didn't work. This is actually a bit strange since we just installed it. Well, live debugging, I guess. So we are now in the developer mode. So I actually expected the failure to look differently, but let's just roll with this one. So as you see, I've opened the live log here. So the live log shows you a lot of information, but the interesting stuff is usually what you want to watch out is if you, for instance, do this x11 start program. You can, it should show up somewhere in here. So this is essentially a log that tells you what is all happening. So if I just highlight all occurrences, there should be, yeah, the last one is here. So we'll see, okay, this is on line 30. Yep, that's it. It says I launch x11 start program, and what it then does is it checks that that this matches. It looks for this needle RStudio. Now, unfortunately, I messed something up, and there is no command RStudio, so obviously it will not find it. You see, it looks for this needle for 30 seconds, and if we weren't in this developer mode, it would fail and the test would be aborted. But since we're in developer mode, it's paused, and we can now actually take a look at this machine. So it also gives us the corresponding command. So I can just paste that in my terminal. The only thing that I need to modify is I need to set this to localhost, since this is running in the this one is running in the container, and it sees itself as openQA1. So I just have to change that to localhost. And this is, why is this not working? So probably, this is certainly interesting. Yeah, so as you see, test development is usually trying to find out what you messed up So ensure installed worked. So let's just go into the root console. By the way, the root password and the user password for all these virtual machines is not secret with threes. So that's not a secret. It's written somewhere in there, but just so you know that. Okay, so let's English layout zippers. And I guess, yep. See, so in this case, this issue was rather trivial. The problem is I don't have I just don't have the correct desktop application installed. And now if I would rerun this again, RStudio, if I could type RStudio, it should launch. Good, yeah, awesome. So what would we do now is two things. If we would actually want to mess with this test, first thing is we would have to add RStudio desktop in here. And what we now have to do is we have to tell openQA that it what it should look for. So what does RStudio actually look like? And so we have to create for it an RStudio needle. And what you can, and the nice thing about this is you can do this, and most people just do it via the web interface, via the needle editor. So we go to Open Needle Editor. And now it opened the wrong screenshot. So in case openQA will decide to take, it will take one of the latest screenshots and give you that to create a new needle. In case it's the wrong one, just resume just resume the test, skip the timeout, and it should now have created. God damn it! Okay, this should unfortunately not happen, because this is the wrong screenshot. Looks like there's something buggy in the web user interface. This is unfortunate, since I now I wanted to use this one and to modify the needle in there without having to wait for the whole test to rerun again, but I'm afraid we're going to have to do that. Okay, that's nasty. Yeah, okay. So let's we'll restart the test, and we'll re-needle it. And let's so unfortunately, since these tests take quite a while, so if we go the web, so you see the test's been now already running for 13 minutes, and it spent a big chunk of time installing stuff. We could use snapshots for that, but that's a little bit more involved how to get that stuff up and running. So let's now do the following. So since these tests take quite a bit of time to run, what I definitely recommend on doing is make more than one modification at a time, since otherwise it just takes so long to figure out how a single test works. Now something happened. Nope. Okay, that didn't work. So we'll now jump a few steps ahead, and we'll say, okay, let's assume in the next run we'll fix this, that it will find our studio, and then we'll do some actual stuff with it. So in case you are not familiar with RStudio, and I'm also not really familiar with it either, I've just packaged it and that's mostly it. But so what to just showcase a few of the stuff that openQA could do is we could, for instance, tell it, okay, you've opened RStudio and let's now enter text. So wrong keyboard layout. Print. Okay, English keyboard layout, and I don't know where the braces are. There. And I think R is, does it work like that? Yeah. Okay. So we could say, tell openQA, okay, so there's a question if you can do everything with the web interface. No, unfortunately you cannot. So what you can do in the web interface is you can modify needles. You cannot modify the actual test code. So this stuff that you see in here, you can't modify. You can't modify it, or maybe can. No, you can't. So to tell openQA to actually run different things, you can't do that via the web interface. You can modify needles, and I hope I really want to get to that part, since it's a relatively integral part of openQA. But the actual test steps that are run, you have to do that in your favorite text editor. So that's unfortunately not going to. That's at least currently not possible to do that really on the fly. And it would be also, I mean, in a perfect world, I would just go in here and say, oh, yeah, I messed this one up, so I'll just, so I don't know, hey, okay, I've got now to this step, and now I'll just tell it, hey, enter this text, click on that, and so on, and tell it to continue. But it's relatively hard to pull off. So, bye, Mir. Thanks for joining. So that's unfortunately relatively hard to pull off, but you can modify needles via this. Good. So back to this one. So what we'll do is we'll just do something very simple. We'll just do a print foo, and then check that that there's actually this output. And let's then also do something like yeah, let's just say we'll click on the file menu. Will we do file menu? Let's just open About RStudio. It's a little bit boring since the actual test does that, and but well, simple enough. So what we'll now tell openQA before we restart this whole test is we'll tell it, okay, go into the console, type in print foo, press enter, then check that the output looks roughly like this, and then go to the help menu and open About RStudio. And we'll make our life a little bit easier in this case. And that is, so you can tell openQA, hey, find this menu, click this button, and so on. And that's, it takes a while to complete. And what's considerably simpler to do is just press keys. So Alt-H will give us this menu, A, and it will open. So we'll use that one, as that is that will be a lot simpler to pull off. And then we'll just check that this menu opens, and then we'll say, okay, let's go Alt F and Q and check that we are back at the desktop. Sounds like a plan to me. So we'll kill this one, and I'll go back into here. So what did we say? So we'll say we want to, since I'm not 100% sure whether we'll be, if we open up RStudio, whether we'll be in the console and can just start typing in stuff in here, we'll start and we'll tell openQA to click into the console. And how you do that is you do assert and click. And if you're interested what these functions actually do, you can go to the openQA documentation. You search for test API, or you go directly to this link, test API. And now we'll search for assert and click, and there it is, assert and click. And what this is you give it a needle that it should, and then you can specify a lot of things that you optionally want to set. For instance, if you want a longer timeout and whatnot. So we'll just say, okay, assert and click, and we'll search for the needle RStudio desktop click into console. So I've made this name, I've just made this name up. So this needle isn't going to match. We'll have to create it ourselves. Okay, so then openQA will click into the console, and then we'll send it to print foo to enter the text and press enter. Now, this is done by send string. Was it that? No. So let's go to the documentation, and there should be type string. That's it. So we'll say type string print foo. Now we might run into a little bit of trouble, since if we tell openQA to type print foo, it will act. No, let's just try this to be safe, since we'll otherwise have to restart the test again. So if you tell it to print foo, what it will do is it will send all these individual keys to the virtual machine. And in case it autocompletes stuff, it could end up with duplicates. So print foo. Now I'm just going to press that. Okay, so That should work. And then we're going to press enter. So type string, then enter. You do that via send key. And for enter, you don't type enter, it's ret. In case, so this is also in this, you can find that in the documentation as well. So under send key, the special characters, you'll find enter, here it is. So here you have all those special characters in case you need to handle those. So now we are at this point, and now we are going to now we want to check that this is actually printed, that this actually displays here. Yeah. So we are going to again tell openQA, okay, now look for a needle that's called RStudio desktop console print foo. Yeah. And this one is also obviously not going to exist. So this we'll have to again create it ourselves. So what was the next thing we wanted to do? Press Alt H. And then press A. And for that we can use send key. And what send key, what you can also do with send key, you can specify multiple keys. So in this case, Alt H. A. And then we'll actually do, so what we'll do next is, Alt H, A, and then we're going to check, okay, is this menu open, and we are simultaneously going to click on OK. So I'm going to just assert and click and say RStudio desktop help menu OK button. Now, additional thing here. If we just do it this way, this is probably not going to work, since I'm afraid that openQA will send these keys too quickly. And what you can do in this case, and as you can see, I don't know that by heart, so I'm just going to look that up. We can tell it, send this key and wait for the screen to change. So let's say if openQA would be too fast, and so we'll tell it press it Alt H and wait until something actually changes. If you want to have this more robustly, you would say click on help, click on this one, and that would definitely work. But this one is just a little bit faster, and you don't have to create a needle for every single thing, since that can be a little bit tedious. So I'm just going to take a look into my other test. Where was it? I thought it was. Ah, yes, exactly. Wait screen change. That's what we're looking for. So that's what I was talking about. So this is what this essentially does is this is some Perl syntax. As I said, I'm not a Perl expert, so any Perl experts are more than welcome to try to explain this. But essentially, it means you have to it executes anything that's in here, and it waits until the and it waits for the screen to actually change. Okay, and next thing we're going to do is we are just going to press Alt F4 and close it. So send key Alt F4. That should close our studio, and then we are going to assert screen desktop. And what we are going to do now is we are going to reuse an existing needle, and as far as I know, this is called generic desktop. I think that's a needle that matches that. Yeah, I killed the machine already. Yeah, that would essentially match the desktop. So that should be it. Since someone wanted a garbage commit, we are going to do a garbage commit now. Push that to my fork. Yeah. Oh. Oops. Wrong branch. So that should be should now have the modifications in there. Yeah, there's the garbage commit. And so now just let's rerun openQA clone job. Okay, new job is created. It's getting set up. Starting, very good. So we're going to just saw the boot screen. Going to start controlling this test. And yeah, unfortunately now we're going to have to wait a bit, since this is going to take a while. I hope that at this time. Yeah, and unfortunately, as you can see, there's something a little bit broken in the web UI. So it skipped this. If you check the job from which we cloned, that contained this boot to desktop one, it's for some reason completely missing in here. I don't exactly know why. It shouldn't, but let's hope that the web UI will now cooperate. No, please, I want to control this test. Thank you. Okay. So, there's... oh god, people are asking for a YouTube upload. Ooh. I hope this will be useful. So, since we're going to have to now wait for RStudio and RStudio Desktop to install, any questions? Are you all completely burned out, since we are now getting close to the 2-hour mark? So in case you got questions, feel free to ask them now, or otherwise I'll try my best to maybe explain a little bit more stuff about needles, since there's a few catches with those still that I'd like to get at least covered in this session. Uh-oh, I melted brains. That's not good. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So let's if you can still absorb a little bit, we'll I'll try to get to the actual part about needles. So I've conveniently until now not really talked about them. So those, as I said, this is stuff you have. So the needles are essentially, they tell you how you match parts of the screen against the expected input that you see. And what a needle actually is in practice, it's a PNG of so it's a screenshot, and then it's a JSON file that contains the regions that should be matched. And so since this is still installing, let's go into the I've got a nice program from the openQA folks in Fedora that's called the Python Needle Editor, and I can hopefully show you how this needle stuff looks in practice. Instance, so okay, so this is one of the screenshots from the existing needles, and okay, this is weird. Sorry. So, and how those needles usually work? So they have certain areas that are defined in it. So in this case, this needle contains 2 areas. And what openQA will do is, if you tell it to match against this needle, it will take this region from the screenshot and this region from the screenshot and try to find them in the video output. Few important things. It will take these regions and it will try to find them anywhere. And it will also try to find, if you have multiple regions, it will try to find them individually. So in case this RStudio output changes completely, and now this one would appear down there, the needle would still match. But important thing to remember here is, if you rely on elements being in a certain in certain parts on the screen, the needle will so needle regions will not ensure that. If you want to check that this text is actually below this, you have to make that one region. I found that out the hard way. Yeah. So this is really important. So it can happen if you would add a region here, and there was somewhere another text console, it could match somewhere completely differently. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And let me just go back quickly. Yeah, so we are nearly there. Nearly there. Okay. And another thing that so when I was talking about this assert screen stuff, what you are actually giving it is not the name of the needle, but the so-called needle tag. Yeah. So in this, this is also just an entry in the in this JSON file, and in this Python needle editor, it's written down here. And the important thing is that that needles. So if you can have 100 needles and they can all have the same tag. So for instance, this generic desktop one, this is actually, as far as I know, there is I think actually 100 needles that have this tag included. And they actually have multiple of them. So there's a generic desktop for GNOME. There's a generic desktop for XFCE, for KDE, for all that stuff. And initially I thought this is really, really silly, because it makes stuff so confusing, and it confused the heck out of me. But the big advantage of this is you can write a function. So for instance, x11 start program, what this actually does is it, oh no, sorry, not this one, but it means you can, for instance, write a function that will just close all windows and then assert screen that you're back at the desktop and ensure that there's no more open windows. And the nice thing is, if you have a needle for every single desktop that has this generic desktop tag, you can actually use the same function all over the place, and you don't have to specify this yourself manually. Okay, so now we see let's go back to openQA. And something interesting happened. The command was somehow cut off in the middle. That shouldn't have happened. So what we didn't actually modify that part of the tests. So it should have typed this one, but it didn't type it completely. This looks probably like a quirk, since maybe my machine was under heavy load. So I'm just going to cheat a bit, and I'm going to type it in here manually, so that we don't have to restart the whole thing again, since we are already close to the we are already nearly at 2 hours. So let's just do this one. Okay. Resume test execution. It should now continue. Does it? It probably... no, we'd have to also close extern. Yeah. Okay, that was it. Yeah, so this was just a little quirk. And now you see RStudio worked. Nice. So the desktop, the task runner was opened. Oh. What on earth? Why is it already continuing? That shouldn't have happened. Oops. Okay, this is unfortunately now a bit weird, since it should have actually failed, but what you can now see, the test is actually the test is actually continuing. Oh boy. Okay, so yeah, I'd say we're already at the 2-hour mark. I've melted enough brains today, so and since people are now already having to leave, let's wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for attending. I'll try to get this uploaded somewhere. In case you're interested in another session and continuing this tutorial and doing something else, please let me know. Write me an email. If you want specific parts covered, if you want to essentially tell me if please also give me some feedback. So this is my very first live stream, and if you tell me this sucked, please do so. You can send it to me via an anonymous email. If you're afraid that I might show up under your bed, I won't. But so please tell me, what did you like, what didn't you like, what would you like to see, would you like to see another session, and so on. So essentially anything that any wishes and whatever. So thank you everyone for participating. Have a nice day, and don't forget to test more stuff.